Welcome to the Huntington Way Show, where we help parents navigate the educational maze. I'm your host, Yvonne Strachan, author and founder of InspirationalHomeschooling.com. And I am speaking with Dr. Douglas Pietersma. He is the researcher for the National Home Education Research Institute, NERI, and professor at Regent University. Show is brought to you by the Huntington Learning Center and Inspirational Homeschooling. You're listening on Power Talk 1040 AM, 98.5 FM, and 95.7 FM. Please like and subscribe to Power Talk 1040 on YouTube. Welcome to the show, Douglas.
Good to be here.
Great to have you here. So tell me a little bit about what you do with NERI.
Well, NERI is the only research institute that has been focused on primarily home education research, and it has existed for over 30 years, which if you think back to the time frames of home education, this was really before homeschooling was even known to be a thing in most circles. And so it is run by a gentleman named Dr. Brian Ray. He's been the primary researcher for over 30 years at NERI. My responsibility is actually as the editor of NERI's peer review research journal called the Homeschool Researcher. So I am responsible for making sure that gets published. So NERI not only conducts research, but also is a publishing house for those who are doing research, whether they're independent researchers or university professors, doctoral students, master students doing their theses and dissertations on home education. And we make sure that gets out there. So all of our information is publicly available, and you can find it at nheri.org, neri.org.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And I know I've looked at all the research done by NERI in the past, and it is amazing. It's really helpful to homeschool families and other people that are considering it. So tell me, what is the most important or the most impactful qualification that a parent could have to homeschool?
Well, when you start talking about qualifications, of course, people's mind generally run to some sort of formal certification. And there
Hmm.
are some states here in the United States, 10 of them as of right now, that actually require a certification by a parent on some level. Perhaps they require them to be a high school graduate or to have some sort of a certification or training from the state in order to homeschool their children. Others don't have any requirement. I'm fortunate that I live in a state that has virtually no requirements, very low regulation in the state of Wyoming. But I would say that the biggest qualification for someone to be able to home educate their children is to be a parent. And
Hmm.
that may not seem like, well, that doesn't sound like an educational qualification. But I put it in this perspective. There is no one who has the vested interest, the love, the passion to give knowledge to their children like a parent does. A parent wants their children to succeed. We read in the Bible in 3rd John, I have no greater joy than that my children walk in truth. And of course, the knowledge that we get from the Word of God and the knowledge that we teach our children, incorporated into biblical principles, becoming wisdom as they grow and become more mature in their faith and in their life, that is really what we desire for our children. And there are certainly some great, well intentioned people in school systems, but there's no way they can compare to the passion that a parent has. And the fact that God has given that responsibility to parents leads me to say the qualification a parent needs is the fact that they're a parent.
Yeah, that's great. So, what advice do you have for the person who says, "Ah, there's no way a parent can do anything that and everything that they need to teach, right?"
I would say to that, yes, there is no way. There is
Hmm.
no way a parent can teach every potential piece of information that their child could ever need to know.
Hmm.
But by the way, a school can't do that either. Only God knows exactly what that child is meant for in their purpose and design, which means God has to be the leader in what they learn and how they learn in all of their education and discipleship. Of course, we want them to know their math and their history, and we teach them those things. And certainly, we're going to come to places in home education, I know I did, where our child needs to or wants to learn something and we don't know it. What do?
Hmm.
We learn it with them. I have found so many families that say, well, you know what? I had a child. They wanted to learn a foreign language and I don't speak that foreign language. Or they wanted to learn another subject. They were very passionate and interested in that. Well, guess what? We learn it together. We go find the resources. And really, what we're teaching our children to do is do what adults do. Adults learn based on what they need to know or based on what they want to know. And
Hmm.
they go out and they find the information, they read it, they listen, they watch, whatever method they use to absorb that material. Well, we can do the same thing with our children as they learn. So I hear a lot about gaps, so I'm afraid my child might have some learning gaps. Well, of course, because unless all of us know everything, which we don't, we all have learning gaps. None of us are omniscient as God. So we learn to fill those gaps as they're needed, and we teach our children how to do that independently, which is really the end goal of our home education effort is that they become independent, lifelong, self-teaching individuals.
Right. Yeah. So that they're resourceful, just
They're
like
very
we have
much.
to be.
Absolutely.
So, is there a correlation between a parent having a degree or not having a degree in terms of their child's academic success?
So you got to love the word correlation because now we're talking about statistics and studies.
Hmm.
Nothing that I have seen, and there is some research that NERI has done to look at perhaps a parent's education level and or the fact that they may or may not have been certified as a teacher before this. And there is nothing in the research as it stands right now that says it is more beneficial for a parent who has had a certain amount of education or a teaching certification, or that it is detrimental because a parent has not had that. If you need an example for this one, I actually like to refer people to a book that was written by and about Dr. Ben Carson. And his mom did not have any substantial educational background. I don't remember at what level she stopped her education, but it was a very low level of education, and yet she constantly encouraged. And he was not a homeschool student, but the point is, the encouragement from the parent to learn, to grow, to continue in the education is one of the things that he credits for spurring him on to become the neurosurgeon that he became. And by the way, one of the surgeries that he pioneered is a surgery that my child had. And so I'm very grateful for the knowledge, that he was able to develop, and even for his mother who encouraged him in that education. The certification, the teaching degrees, other degrees, it is not a factor in whether or not we are able to home educate our children.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well addressed. So, what does the research tell us about the success of homeschooling?
So research is always kind of fun because everybody's looking for perhaps a perfect study that shows not only a correlation between two things, but perhaps what causes it, the causation of something. Well, there aren't any perfect studies out there, but there are a growing number of studies that relate to home education. And some of the stuff that NERI has been able to put out is that the home educated child is typically 15 to 25 percentile points above public school students on standardized academic achievement tests. Now, when I bring up that statistic, especially if I'm in a group of scholars, I'm always going to get the, well, what about this? And they're going to talk about the study. And I get that. I totally do. One of the biggest, perhaps, concerns that we might have is the fact that homeschool students take these tests voluntarily, and those who go to government schools take them as a part of their schooling, and so they take them whether they want to or not. So perhaps people would say, look at those, that 15 to 25%. Perhaps that's because the ones that are most likely to do well on those tests are the ones that are volunteering to take that test. And that could potentially be true. However, I like to offer a counterpoint. Those who are taking the test through a government schooling system have specifically been taught to that test. They have been taught this is what you need to know to get good grades on these standardized tests. Whereas the broad range of home educators, for the most part, we're going to teach what we know our children need. We're going to use their interests to help spur their learning. And they may learn a lot of things in home education that have nothing to do with or are not even on these standardized tests. And yet, even those children are testing 15 to 25% points higher than the average public school student. So even though there may be a consideration for, well, who takes these tests, there's also a consideration for what is taught in these environments. And the answer is it still shows that there is a valid increase. But it's not just academic testing. I don't even really like academic testing. I know where my kids are and I know how much they learn. I want to see how much they grow in all these areas, even beyond academics, in measures of social and psychological development, in measures of citizenry, their involvement in the community, in measures of volunteering. Home educated children often, more often than not, are going to show much higher levels in their adult life of those kinds of activities, those kinds that we would see as a positive for their overall development. We've already talked about this, but homeschooling allows children to develop resources. It allows them to develop skills. And these skills are oftentimes skills that now colleges are looking for. In the past, it may have been that some colleges were kind of apprehensive about homeschoolers. We don't know what they learned. We don't know if they learned anything in those schools. But now they realize they've got a lot of self taught, self motivated, self organized students, and they are actually recruiting in many colleges, even up to the Ivy League.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. So when we come back, we are going to talk more about how parents are qualified to homeschool. Welcome back to the Huntington Way Show. You're listening on Power Talk 1040 AM, 98.5 FM, and 95.7 FM. Please like and subscribe to Power Talk 1040 on YouTube. I'm your host, Yvonne Strachan, and I'm talking with Dr. Douglas Pietersma, and we are talking about how parents are qualified to homeschool. So, Douglas, how can a parent homeschool work and take care of a family?
Well, there is a lot of responsibilities rolled together right there. And pretty much every home educating family has faced this at some point. I've got so many responsibilities, but an answer that I've given to more than one question is this: time. Time management, specifically here. And maybe we don't consider ourselves great time managers, but there's so much that we can accomplish at the same time. When we home educate, we take away a lot of the things that are not really educationally relevant to our children, perhaps traveling to and from school, breaks that they may take, whatever it happens to be. But even in our home, when we're doing things, we can incorporate things together that otherwise would have to be done separately if our children were not in the home being educated. So simplifying is great. If we organize our life and we prioritize the things in our life, sure, if we decide we're going to educate our children at home, there may be some things that we decide, you know what, those just don't make the top priority. They may have to drop off. And that's okay, because I don't think any parent will ever look back on the raising of their children and say, I just spent too much time with my children. There are people in the world that will say that. But honestly, I believe if we approach it from a biblical perspective, the time we have is precious. And
Mm-hmm.
when we can make the things that we're doing also part of education, it just means we kill two birds with one stone. I don't know how many parents I've heard and talked to, and perhaps even participated in some things where we're doing something as a family. Well, guess what? This is educational. This is learning. We're building something together. We're going to use our geometry while we build this. We're gonna we're gonna put a recipe together and do some cooking. Well, we're gonna use our fractions while we're doing this. And so many things that we can do that take the many responsibilities we have and we bring them together. It's one of the reasons why I talk about education and discipleship in the Christian home not being two different things, because I don't need to have an educational time with my children and a discipleship time with my children. I can have a discipling educational time with my children. And so when we see our responsibilities as separate and compartmentalized, it can definitely be overwhelming. And it doesn't mean we won't ever have to drop something off the plate, but when we combine things, when we bring them together, time is really what we have on our side.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that you had brought up was applying what they have learned. And I just think about that. We know what they're learning because we're there with them, teaching them. And then we can go, oh, well, that thing that you learned in math, well, we're going to apply this. And doesn't it sink in deeper when they are actually applying what they've learned?
Absolutely. Without that application, we tend to have educational atrophy. If you don't use something, you're probably going to lose it over time.
Yeah. So we have a great advantage as homeschooling parents to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
So, do you have any suggestions for parents who are dealing with a child who exhibits a less than ideal attitude toward learning?
Absolutely. And I've worked with a number of home educating families, and most often this comes up when you've had a child who's been in institutional schools for a number of years, and then you bring them into the home educating environment, and there can be this difficulty to adjust. There can be perhaps some conflict. But when we look at this from a biblical perspective, we realize that God is teaching us as parents as much as we are going to be teaching our children. And so we have to respond correctly. We have to respond with the proper attitude. We have to respond with biblical discipline, with biblical training. And this may take some time, especially if our children have become accustomed to schooling, as I like to call it. The one thing I admonish families not to do to help alleviate some of this is to not recreate school in a home. We talk about home education a lot. For the broader listening audience, perhaps home education means any kind of education that happens in the home. But I don't define it that way, because you can take everything that an institutional school does and you can bring it into your home and you can replicate that. And when you do that, you actually have some of the same things that you're trying to get your children away from, perhaps, maybe not the bullying or things of that nature, but just the paradigm of schooling that you may be trying to get your children away from. And then sometimes we have a tendency to bring it back into our homes. And we do that quite naturally because we do what we're knowledgeable about. Perhaps we were raised in schools and that was the paradigm we understood, and we do that. And when we do that, sometimes there are those conflicts. Maybe we need to explain to our children. Maybe we need to, and I won't say this as a last thing, it really should have been the first thing, to stop and pray. Pray with our children. Help them realize that this isn't just about getting through school. This is really about us growing in our faith and growing to become more like Christ, being consistent with our discipline, helping our children to understand this is the biblical reason for why we're doing this. I won't say that will eliminate all potential conflicts, but certainly God has the power to work in that way.
Yeah, great advice. So, I know you have a special needs child, and I do as well. And one of the things that I have faced with doctor appointments is, well, you don't have the resources, or how can you, um, teach your special needs child? So, let's go over some of the benefits of homeschooling a special needs child.
I can summarize the benefits really into one word, and the answer is flexibility. Anyone who has a child with any range of special needs, and I know that not one special needs child can be compared to another, especially without common diagnoses and such, but the flexibility is what most of our special needs children need. Even in a public school, they realize these students need to have adaptations or they need to have assistance or some form of that. In the home education environment, we can be ultimately flexible. Whereas a school may be able to teach something a little bit differently. They still have a lot of constraints. They have constraints on the curriculum they can use. They have constraints on the time frame in which they can employ this. They have constraints in how many people they have available, teachers, paraprofessionals, and others that are involved in this. As home educators, we are not bound by any of that. If my child's best time of learning is 8 to 10 o'clock at night, my child can learn at 8 to 10 o'clock at night. If I need to take an entire day's worth of work and spread it out over 12 hours, doing it in little 10, 15-minute chunks, we can do that. I'm not saying that's not difficult, but when you have a child that has those kinds of needs, you're willing to make the sacrifices that you need to make in order to get that done. So I would say that that is probably one of the best things. Second to that is the fact that you cut out so many middlemen.
Mhm.
There, when a change needs to be made and a child is in an institutional schooling environment, there is a bureaucratic process. And anyone who's had their children run through the IEP process, the individualized education plan, it involves administrators, it involves teachers, it involves paraprofessionals, maybe a psychologist or counselor, and if they're available, throw the parent in there. But the parent is almost an afterthought in those processes. As the parent, you can make all of those decisions, and you're in the place to do it, not because you have all of those individuals' credentials, but because you know your child better than any of them do. As a matter of fact, you know your child better than all of them combined do.
Mhm.
And that gives you the advantage and the ability to implement education in the most flexible way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's say a parent is really trying to help that special needs child and they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed and a little lost. What is your best advice for them?
Um, well, it's interesting because when you talk about advice, everyone's kind of looking for the golden answer to the question, right? What is the
Yeah.
golden answer to my child's special needs education? And I wrote a couple of articles, and they came out in a magazine called the Old Schoolhouse Magazine. And the first one is called "You Are the Perfect Teacher," meaning if you have a special needs child, you are their perfect teacher. We just talked about that. You know them better than anybody else. You have an insight into how they learn and the things they're interested in more so than any professional will. The second article that I wrote was "Homeschooling is the Perfect Way." And that wasn't to insinuate that here's a roadmap, this is the perfect way for home educating special needs children, but you have the opportunity and the time and the flexibility, as we talked about before, to find and implement your perfect way. So when I teach this at homeschool conventions, I don't tell people this is what I do with my child. This is the perfect way. I say this is what I do with my child. Here's my ideas. What do you do with your child? We'll get some more ideas. We get as many ideas as we can. It's a large brainstorming session. Now each individual can take those little pieces from all the advice they get from all the other parents and they can create what is in fact perfect for their child. So it makes the way for the perfect education. Not that there is a magic one, and not that it doesn't take some effort to find it and implement it. It absolutely does. But as parents, especially those with children who have special needs, we are willing to put in the time and the effort to do that. I haven't found a parent yet that wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Please share how people can find you.
You can find me on social media, specifically at Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn and Twitter. It's at Dr. Douglas Pietersma, and I try to share as much encouragement as I can to the home education community.
Great. Thank you, Douglas. This is Yvonne Strachan, today's host on the Huntington Way Show, where we support you in educating your kids. Thank you for joining us.